All right, everybody. Hey, welcome back. Good to see you guys. Welcome to our first of two review sessions that we're going to start with today and then continue with on Wednesday. I'm just quickly pulling up my copy of the study guide here. And then we should be all good to go. Hey, Daniel, how's it going? Good to see you. I need to use my laptop for a second to send this file to my phone, so that's why I'm going to be kind of looking like I'm typing and looking at the screen here for a minute. Okay. Hello there. Hey, guys. Hi, Nicole and Kenzie. All right. So just pulling up and making sure I have my study guide ready to go. And I do. Okay, cool. Oh, Abraham, your professor. Yeah, well, I mean, like I'm telling you, I'm willing to accommodate you, but I don't see why I should be the one that has to make a change because I'm just going with the official rules. But I'll do it if I need to. You know, it's just this professor should not be trying to hold finals during somebody else's final exam period. I don't understand how that's possible. I mean, it's a completely valid reason to give that I'm just doing it at the prescribed time. If you go and you look at the final exam schedule for Cal State Fullerton, you see the date and you see the time for our exact class time period and session. So the final is not decided by me. It's not supposed to be decided by any professor. It's just given to us by the school administration. So let's see what he says, and once we hear his answer, then we'll move on from there, and I'll find a way to give you your final. But preferably, you take it at the official time. Yeah, I don't know. Is this professor having troubles, or I mean, having some issues with his schedule or his workflow? I mean, I would feel like everybody's just at home now. So how much pressure can there be on you to just hold a final at a designated time? But yeah, I can only presume, but we'll find out. And so not to worry. To other students watching this, Abraham's asking me a question about an email exchange we had where a different professor of his is holding the final of his class at like an arbitrary time, and it overlaps with ours. But that's not what you're supposed to do, because there are rules given to us which say that we're not allowed to change or modify the date or time of the final exams. So the only reason for the conflict is because he's misbehaving. Therefore, he'll give me his response, and then we'll just take action from there. Okay. Hi there. Hello, everybody. How are you doing? Good to see you guys. So yeah, it's 2:30 now. Let's go ahead and get started. Let's see. So did any of you guys notice my message of this, was it a couple days ago, right? Yeah, the study guide for the final. Hopefully you did. How many questions will be given and how many will you have to answer? Okay, so for your midterm, I believe you had to do like 7 out of 11. Now the final, it's clearly, it's open note, open book and everything because you're taking it at home. And you have more time to take it. So instead of an hour and 15 minutes, which the midterm was, you're having an hour and 50 minutes, which is the designated window given by the school. So I'm going to have you probably answer 1 or so more questions and maybe reduce the total number of options. So it might be like instead of 7 out of 11, maybe it'll be something like 8 out of 11 or 8 out of 12. So you're going to have to basically answer around 8 of the questions that are on the list. You don't know which ones that I will select, nor do I, but I'm going to take a set of 11 or 12 questions off that list, and then the instructions given to you will say, answer 8 of these. So you have to answer 8 ultimately out of a curated list of about 11 or 12. and you just don't know which ones that I'm going to pick. So it's to your advantage to be prepared to respond to any of the questions. But I'm going to make the list of final exam questions a little bit more focused on the second half of the class. It is cumulative, and there will be some questions from the first half of the list, but more of them will be from the second. So, I mean, if I had 12 questions or something, maybe it would be a breakdown of like 8 from the second half, 4 from the first half, something like that. But anyway, yeah, that's the method that it will be given to you. It's going to be much like the midterm. It can be written in bullet points, yes. Any method of giving the answers, as long as it's clear and detailed and accurate to the author, that's totally fine. So, I mean, prose paragraphs, bullet points. The main thing is to be thorough and to be comprehensive in the way you answer the questions. It's out of a 0 to 4 point scale, each response. So it's possible to get partial credit for an answer that's not 100% perfect, but pretty good. So you want to get 4s, so that means you should reach for your highest quality response for each question that you answer. But that's just about the test itself. Now, since you do have the study guide, and since I have it also here on my phone, you'd look at it and you would see a total of 72 questions there. About the essay, good question there, Kai. Don't forget that is, no, per the syllabus, the final is 30% of your grade. And the upcoming second essay that's due on Wednesday, don't forget about that, anybody. It's due Wednesday before class time. That is 25% of your grade. So it's 25 for the second essay and it's 30 for the final. So between those two assignments, that's 55% of your grading basis. The first essay and the first midterm, that was 15 and 30%, 45. So the remaining complement of your grade basis, the other 55%, is determined by means of the test and the second essay. And yes, it's on May 13th. Okay, thank you for your question. So it's going to be sent to you. The test form is going to be sent to you at the beginning of the final exam class period, which, let's just pull up the exact time so that everyone's totally clear about that. Okay, so I'm looking here at our syllabus. Final exam scheduled May 13th, Wednesday, May 13th from 3 to 4:50 p.m. And so that's the time and date of the final. I will send to every member of the class through Titanium the final exam test form right around the beginning of class. So no later than 3 on May 13th, you'll be getting the test form delivered through Titanium. Then you'll just have to reply back to me with an attached file, which includes your answers for the final exam, and you have to just submit it to me by the closing of the window of time. So basically you have to return a reply to me with an attachment, no later than 4:50 p.m. So basically it's just like you're taking the final if you were at class, at least in terms of the content and the time window, but you know you are at home, and so you have the benefit of all your notes and other things. So that's it. Wednesday, May 13th, 3 to 4:50 p.m. It's going to be delivered and sent to you through Titanium. You'll see an attached file, which is the test form. You'll open that. You'll write out your answers, either type them or if you really want, you could, I guess, handwrite and scan or something. But then send me back your answers in whatever format you like. And then you've submitted your final, and then you're good for the end of the class. Okay. So have I answered all the questions just about format and time period and everything else? Yes, the second essay is due before class on Wednesday. So as long as you send it to me through email anytime prior to the 2:30 p.m. mark on Wednesday the 6th, that's 48 hours from today. I'm using your email as the timestamp, so just try your best to make sure you get it into me prior to the class time, prior to 2:30 on May 6th. And I'll be grading that over the weekend. They'll be done before the end of the weekend, and so you guys could check for your score on the second essay, you know, later on this week before the week ends. And so you'll have all of your scores, and you'll know exactly where you stand prior to the final. Okay. Is there something else on that I could get to, or do you have a basically good understanding for now about that? If so, if not, you know, you'll let me know and you'll just ask your questions, but that's good information, I guess, to get us started. So everybody knows when the final is. when you have to submit your second essay, and you have your study guide. So the plan for this week is we've finished all our lecture meetings. We're done with talking about the topic of new material, and now we just got to go over the study guide that I delivered and try and cover as many of these questions as we can. So on the study guide itself, there are a range of different questions. The first part of it is from the first half of the class, and that's not been changed. So all the way up to question 37, that's the first half of the semester. And then the second half is the 38 through 72. So there's a total of 72 questions. 37 are from the first half, and then starting on number 38 and below, that's all the stuff from the second half of the course. So I would say to you guys, pull up the study guide if you have not already done it. You could find it on an April 29th Titanium message sent to you guys. It would be in your email inbox or the folder, wherever it is where you receive Titanium announcements from your classes. And let's go through that study guide list. So to those that are prepared and have their study guide handy, is there any particular order you want to go in, or are there specific questions that you want to cover first? Let's hear from you, because this is your time to go over the questions today and Wednesday. So I'm willing to go in any order that you like. What's the first one that you think we should talk about? And then we'll just go from there. So I'll just wait until I see a little reply from you. Plenty of people watching, so that should be no problem. What do you think? First question to go over. Straight down? Okay. That will work. Caitlin, you saying going backwards. That could work. But the thing about going backwards, I don't know. I almost think it would be more valuable to start at the beginning of the new half of class. Start on number 38 and then go down. Because the stuff that's more recent is going to be fresher in your memory. And so if for any reason we couldn't complete our task, I think you'd get more help by being refreshed about the things that started a little earlier than the stuff at the tail end, right? Okay, so good. Then let's do it in that way. All right, so number 38. It says, explain Socrates' example of the statues of Daedalus. Okay, yes, good, Nicole. So we're on the same page. We're doing it that way. So 38 and down. Perfect. And then if we finish that, yeah, we'll go back over the first half with whatever time we still have. And, I'm going to also think about perhaps holding an additional office hour type of, live stream. That'll be determined after Wednesday, but maybe an hour or so of additional time for anybody who wants to make an extra effort to get some further insight on the questions. That could be for Friday or so. But yeah, for now, let's get started. All right, so question 38. And I just say it's this question. Explain Socrates' example of the statues of Daedalus. So what's going on with that example? In this example, Plato, using his teacher Socrates, gives us this concept of these famous sculptures made by the famous sculptor named Daedalus. What was the point of that? He said if you had one of these sculptures, you would prefer to have it with what? What makes the possession of these sculptures a little bit better for you? If they come together with what? There's a specific thing that the author talked about which helps to prevent these sculptures from doing something. And what is that thing? So I need your feedback, right? I mean, that's part of what we're doing here. So using your mind, using your memory, the book, your notes, or whatever else. Okay, ropes. Good, ropes. Now, why would these ropes be needed? The belief was that these statues were so realistic looking that the myth developed that if they were not fastened to the ground by means of ropes, then they would probably run away. Yeah. So if you had the statue attached by ropes, that enhances the value of it because now it just stays with you and it doesn't escape. This is supposed to be a metaphor, okay? So the statues and the ropes are to stand for different parts of the definition of knowledge. So can you tell me what these ropes were supposed to stand for in reference to the three-part definition of knowledge? The ropes represent what? What are they supposed to be signifying for the author? They're kind of a stand-in for the concept of what? Go ahead, ropes. Thank you. What do they stand for? Justification, exactly right. So what's the similarity between the ropes and justification? Okay, so the ropes prevent the statue from leaving. And the justification that you have prevents what thing from going away? A true belief. Okay, so he says the statues without ropes are like true beliefs without justification, or as he calls it, correct opinions. A correct opinion is just a true belief, but that's not based on anything. So would you like to have a true belief? Yes. But would you prefer to have that same true belief based on evidence? Yeah. Because when the justification is there, it prevents the correct opinion from leaving your mind or from you forgetting about it. So think about information that you retain in your mind. The reason that you retain it is because you actually know it, because it's based on certain justification that you have. And therefore, it's better to have that justification because it makes it so that you don't just forget what your correct opinion is, or so that you don't shift your opinion about it. So the ropes upgrade the value of the statue by keeping it there. And the justification upgrades the value of a correct opinion by keeping it in your mind. It also converts a correct opinion into the status of knowledge. So justification is key because it secures and grounds your true beliefs. Okay, so that was the point of that whole example. The ropes are like justification, and just like the way justification keeps your true beliefs from changing or from being forgotten, the ropes prevent the Daedalus statues from escaping or from getting away. Okay, so now we can keep going. Question 39. What is the classical account of knowledge? So a lot of these questions, there's a little overlap. So talking about one kind of can help, at least with our review, talking about the next. What was the three-part definition of knowledge then from the Greeks? It's blank, blank, blank. What were the three required components? They said that for you to know something, what are the three things that all had to occur? The classical ancient account of knowledge. It says that knowledge is a what? What is knowledge? There's three ingredients to it. What are they? Okay, good, Cindy. Justification, truth, and belief. So in order to know something, the belief was, or the claim was, the definition is, first of all, it has to be true, which means that whatever the statement that is being stated says actually matches the facts of reality. Furthermore, you have to actually believe that thing, so you have to think that it's true. But that's not enough. You have to believe it, it has to really be true, and then you also have to have your justification or evidence. But if you do have all three of those parts, then that's when you've got knowledge. So, I mean, like right now, I think that you know that this coronavirus is deadlier than the flu. Well, first of all, I would say, I mean, I guess I can't tell you what you believe, but a lot of people do believe that, and I would hope that you are one of them. And let's say it's true. I mean, it is true. It's deadlier than the flu if you just looked at the mortality rate that it has. And then the evidence is also there because this question has been studied and there's a lot of statistical evidence that's quickly and rapidly accumulating towards that conclusion. So we can say maybe that we know that it's deadlier than the flu because it's something believed, something true, and something which evidence indicates is true. So that's knowledge, a composite of those three requirements: justification, truth, and belief. You'd want to talk about what the three different conditions mean, and you'd have to explain how they come together to give knowledge. You could also mention how if any of the conditions are not met, then that would not be an example of knowledge. Like you can't know something false, you can't know something you have no reason to believe, nor can you know something that you don't believe. Okay, so then after that, it's question 40. It says, explain how Gettier shows that justified true belief is not sufficient for knowledge. Okay, so Edmund Gettier is the 20th century American philosopher who basically set out to eliminate this classical account of knowledge to show that it was not the right definition of it. He does this by means of a couple of examples. And in the examples, we are told that here's an individual who has a justified true belief, but they still don't have knowledge, which would throw off the definition, because according to the definition, when you have a justified true belief, you're supposed to have knowledge. He's saying, no, not always. There could be counterexamples, situations where you have all those conditions met, but knowledge still is not there. Okay, so the first example that he gave to make this point was the example of the Smith and Jones job hunt situation, all right? Now, maybe you remember some of the basic details of that situation, but let's go over it again. Smith and Jones are two people that are doing what? What are they doing? Smith and Jones are doing something, and Smith has a specific belief pertaining to all of that. So tell me those two things. What are Smith and Jones doing in the situation that's given? And what is it that Smith ends up believing in that situation? Okay, so they're competing for a job. Good. They're two job candidates that are the finalists for a position, and only one of them will get hired. Now, after they've done their interview, Smith comes up with this belief that, okay, Kenzie, you said one part about it, that there's 10 coins in the pocket. Yes, but that's not all. So what Smith believes is, first of all, that Jones will get the job and that Jones has 10 coins in his pocket, right? We need to tell about why he believes those two statements. Why does he believe that Jones will get the job? What is the reason that Smith thinks that Jones will get this job? There's a definitive reason that he thinks that. What is he basing that off of? Like, why does he think that Jones will get the job? Because the boss told him that. Yes, correct. Okay, so after the interviews, during a private moment while Smith was there and Jones was not, boss goes over to Smith and he says, hey, Smith, I just want to let you know, a little advance heads up, that I'm actually going to hire the other guy, Jones, just so you know. Okay, now how did Smith find out that Jones has 10 coins in his pocket? How did he find that out? Where did that information come from? How did he discover that? Because Smith does figure that out. He asked, or really he counted them himself. So, okay, Smith, two things. Was told by the boss, I will hire Jones. Second, after that, he counted the coins of Jones' pocket himself, and therefore he counted that there were 10. So now he puts those two beliefs together and they form this one belief. Jones will get the job, and Jones has 10 coins in his pocket. Subsequently, after that, he deduces a second statement from that, which is very similar, but which just is phrased like this. The man who gets the job has 10 coins in his pocket. The man who gets the job has 10 coins in his pocket. He deduces that from the first initial belief that Jones gets the job and Jones has 10 coins. Now, in this situation, like in all Gettier cases, there's like a twist, a little plot twist ending. Can you tell me how that little plot twist goes? Boss comes back, and what does he say now? So just follow up with how the story ends. In the end, what happened? Okay, so surprise, Smith gets the job. Even though he said he would give it to Jones, he was playing, and now he does give it to Smith. And also, and this is just random, and Smith didn't know this about his pocket, but he also has 10 coins in his own pocket. So what was Smith's belief that we talked about just now? That the man who gets the job has 10 coins in his pocket. Now, did that turn out to be true? Yes, it did. But not for the reason that Smith believed. He thought it would be true because of Jones getting the job and Jones having that number of coins. But in the end, actually, Smith got it by surprise, and also totally by coincidence, he happens to have 10 coins also. So what we have here is that Smith ended up with a belief which was true, and also which was based on justified reasons. But yet, it's not actually knowledge, because it's just random luck and coincidence that it turned out to be true, given the mismatch between his evidence and the facts that make the proposition true in the end. So that's a case of a justified true belief that's not knowledge, because it only turned out to be true due to luck And knowledge is supposed to be something that doesn't happen just because of chance or coincidence, but rather skill and the proper kind of judgment. There's another Gettier case too after that, which I could just quickly mention to you, but I'm just going to kind of skim it because I don't want to spend too much time on one question. But Gettier's other case is also developed to show that a justified true belief could happen without having knowledge. So in the other Gettier example, Smith and Jones are coworkers. Smith believes Jones owns a Ford car because he pulls up in a Ford and he tells him that it is his. So Smith believes Jones owns a Ford. Now after that, he forms these three beliefs about Jones owning the Ford, but disjoined to another statement. So a disjunction is an or sentence. And with a disjunction, only one of the two terms has to be true for the whole thing to be true. Like, so for example, either I'm wearing glasses or the lockdown will end before the fall semester begins. That's a true statement just because I'm wearing the glasses. Never mind the other part about whether or not the campus will open. Actually, we know at Fullerton that it will not, but disregarding that, the first disjunct is sole sufficient for the whole or statement to be true. So Smith believes that Jones owns a Ford and he's justified in that. Therefore, he's likewise justified to believe that either Jones owns a Ford or, wait for it, now he has this other friend named Brown, Smith does. This other guy, Brown, he has lost touch with him and he doesn't know where in the world he is. So he has three guesses: Boston, Barcelona, and Brest-Litovsk. So he forms these three propositional beliefs that are in the form of an or statement. Either Jones owns a Ford or Brown's in Barcelona. Starting with Boston. Either Jones owns a Ford or Brown's in Boston. Either Jones owns a Ford or Brown's in Barcelona. Either Jones owns a Ford or Brown is in Brest-Litovsk. Now in this case, the little plot twist is that, surprise, Jones does not own a Ford. It looked like he did to all appearances, but he's just playing. I mean, that's a rental Ford and he doesn't own it. Doesn't actually own it. But, and this is also just randomly coincidental, Brown, the other guy, long lost friend, he happens to be in Barcelona at that time. So Smith's belief that either Jones owns a Ford or Brown is in Barcelona turned out to be true on account of the second disjunct. He had his evidence to believe it based on his evidence for the first disjunct. But though that was a justified true belief, we would not call it knowledge, because yet again, it's just randomly, coincidentally true that Brown is in Barcelona and he had no evidence to believe that. So his justification was based on the disjunct that turned out to be false. Okay, there are other Gettier cases too, I guess you could probably think about. There's the case where you see a fake barn, and behind the fake barn there's a real barn. So you believe there's a barn over there, which actually is true, and you had your reasons, but it's not really that you know it, because you would have still believed it even if there had not been a real barn behind the facade. Okay, now from there, let's go ahead. Two more things about the Gettier type of material. What does it mean for one proposition to entail another? So if one statement entails a second one, if A entails B, then what's the logical relationship of A and B? If A entails B, what do you think? This means that what? If A entails B. So let me give you one example. My cat was born in 2004. And here she is, and you can see she's still going strong. So if she was born in 2004, and now it's 2020, that proposition entails that what? Is she older than 10? I would say yes. So does being born in 2004 mean that today you have to be older than 10? Of course, it entails that. So if a statement entails a second one, right? Then what does that mean? So like, I mean, yeah, tell me. If A entails B, then here I'll help you a little. If A is true, what follows? When A entails B, the fact that A is true means that what about B? B must be true, exactly, yeah. So when A entails B, the truth of A guarantees the truth of B. So take the statement that I'm born in the 80s and take the statement that you are born in the 2000s. That conjunction, Vulich is from the 80s and I am from the 2000s, that entails that I'm older than you, because it has to be that I'm older than you if I was born in a previous decade to you. Okay, so that's just what entailment is. It was mentioned by Edmund Gettier because he uses the concept of entailment to explain the closure principle, which is next in our list. Okay, so closure principle, that's question 42. What the closure principle says is that if you have justification to believe one statement, and that statement entails a second one, then you're also justified in believing the second one. Okay, so you're justified in believing that my cat was born in 2004. What is your reason? Because you heard me say that. So based on my testimony, you now have evidence for the fact that my cat was born in 2004. Since you're justified in believing that, you are similarly justified in believing that she's older than 10, because that first proposition entails the second. So basically, justification transfers over from one statement to another one which is logically implied by it. Okay, so I'm your professor, and you're justified in believing that because of our whole experience this semester where I've been instructing you and giving you grades. Since you have evidence and basis to believe that I'm your professor, you are also justified in believing that I graduated high school, because being a professor entails that you graduated high school. Now, Daniel, you asked the question, can you repeat the closure principle? Here, I'll just type it out one time so that's clearly put in the live stream. Wait, sorry, that's the definition of entailment. So I was giving you the wrong definition there. Okay, now closure principle. And that is the closure principle, the second little comment there. Okay, so it says if S is justified in believing A, and A entails B, then when S deduces B from A, the subject S is also justified in believing B. So S is just a letter that stands for a person. A and B are letters that stand for a pair of propositions. And the idea is that if you already have evidence for believing A, then when you trace A to a logical consequence, B, you're also justified in believing B. So like, okay, all cats are mammals, right? We can agree on that. All cats are mammals. So I have a cat. Let's call the fact that Vulich has a cat proposition A. So you're justified in believing that I have a cat, clearly, because you've seen her appear. So that's great evidence to conclude that I have a cat. You're therefore justified in that. Call that A. Now, suppose that you're just thinking logically and you're like, well, you know, all cats are mammals. So if he has a cat, it logically follows from that he has a mammal. And suppose you deduce that second fact from the first. So here's your thought process. Professor has a cat, and that entails that he has a mammal. So now I'm believing second, that he has a mammal. The point is that your justification carries across to that second statement. So since you already are justified in believing I have a cat, you're likewise furthermore justified in believing something that is implied by that, namely that I have a mammal, which is implied by the proposition that I have a cat. Notice that the other way around wouldn't work. What if I just told you I own a mammal? That'd be a weird thing to say. But you couldn't say, well, he must have a dog or he must have a cat, because they're both mammals. But from the fact that I have a cat, it does follow that I have a mammal. And so if you logically deduce your way to that second fact you're justified in believing. Why did Gettier mention this? Well, he mentioned it because in his example that I just talked about, the Smith and Jones job thing, first of all, Smith believes Jones has this, that he's getting the job and has 10 coins in his pocket, and he deduces from that the second proposition that the man who gets the job has 10 coins in his pocket. And that's just supposed to be the point where we see the justification transfer over to that second belief so that it gets the status of J in the JTB equation. Okay, good. So we've covered closure principle. Now we're moving on to Descartes. So quickly, if you could tell me, what is Descartes' method of doubt? What is that method? Descartes, in his Meditations, says that you should assume to be false what things? What is the method of doubt telling you to do? When should I assume that things are false based on this so-called method? Assume that things are false, but under what like when should I do that? According to the method of doubt that is stated by René Descartes. Well, you saying doubt everything, Kenzie, but that's a little fast. Caitlin, you say you must doubt everything but you and your thoughts. Well, you're talking to me now about the stuff that you doubt, but I'm asking about the methodology. Okay, so I see here Isabel, or is it Bianca? I think either way, but assume to be false anything that can possibly be doubted. That's the right way of replying. So the method of doubt says that you should assume to be false anything and everything that could even possibly be doubted. And why would he do that? Well, we'll get to that actually in the next question. So first of all, just the method of doubt, yeah. It says assume to be false anything that can possibly be doubted. So if there's even one tiny chance it could be false, okay, then you're going to be like, it is false as far as I'm concerned. And I'm going to continue on in the same way until I find something that can't be doubted. Now, when this method of doubt is being used, Descartes says there's kind of like only one thing really that that survives this method and cannot be doubted. So what is the thing that remains certain, even with the method of doubt being used? Even if you're trying to doubt as much as you possibly can, he says that there's one thing you can't doubt, and that's right, Kai, that you exist. Okay, so that you exist is something you can't doubt. Why not? Why can't we doubt that? Or why can't you doubt that? Tell me why it's not possible to doubt that you exist. Do you exist? Tell me why it's not possible to doubt that. That's all I want to know. Yeah, because you're thinking. You say we think, and I understand why, because we're all talking together, but in the method of doubt, you would limit yourself to the first person, because really all you know for sure is that you're thinking. And you can't exist if you don't have thoughts. Well, I think, sorry, I just followed your way of phrasing it there, Kai, but it's better to say it a different way, that if you have thoughts, then you must exist. You can't not exist if you are thinking, and you are thinking. So I think, therefore I am. The one thing that can't be doubted by any person, or at least by you anyway, is that you exist, and the reason is because you are thinking. Now, what do you know to exist? Not necessarily the body that you see in the mirror, because maybe that's a big dream. The existence of your body could simply be a deception that you're having. But even if that were so, you know at a minimum that you're a thinking mind, because you're even contemplating these doubts. So, you know, even if nothing's real in the external world, and it's all a big fake simulation, at a minimum, you're some kind of mind experiencing the simulation in some way. So you know you exist, if not as a body, at least as a mind, because you could doubt. And the method of doubt, yes, says to assume to be false anything that could be doubted. Okay, so we're going now to 44. Tell me, why did Descartes want us to do this thing with the method of doubt? Why should we be playing along with him and, you know, pretending that we think things are false when they could possibly be doubted? Why would we employ the method of doubt? Why would we use it in the first place? What's the basis for him saying, let's do this with the method of doubt? What's the goal behind doing that? What would be the goal? It's not just for fun, even though it is kind of fun. What's the reason then that he says use the method of doubt? Why? Why though? Okay, assume things are false if they can be doubted. Why would I do that? Just come up with something. I mean, even if you just have to kind of think about it without looking at notes, just why would anyone ever say that? Use a method of doubt. Yeah, okay, to find definitive truths, exactly. Because in the larger historical context, Descartes sees himself as a part of like this new modern time point that we're living in. Kenzie, you're referring to an example, find a perfect apple, but it's a little underspecified when you say that. I mean, the example is supposed to be a metaphor or an analogy to what he's really doing, because clearly none of this has to do with apples. But that's a fair point, right? He says, so you're going to try and discover what is absolutely certain. And why would we need to do that? Because science is taking off in this century that he was writing in, right? We're starting to learn that the Earth's not in the middle of everything, the sun is. We're starting to learn, Newton's laws of physics, anatomy, medicine, more realistic artistic techniques. So with this big burgeoning, like expanding body of human knowledge, he said that has to be based on stuff that is totally secure and certain. And if the first assumptions that we hold turn out to be false later on, then we're going to have to throw out all the knowledge that we built on the foundation. So he says, let's build a knowledge on top of an absolutely stable, solid foundation, and that means we got to find something to put down there that is rock solid, that can't be doubted. So that's why he says use the method of doubt. It's in the pursuit of truth and certainty. And again, why would we do that? Because he thinks you have to have total certainty to get science and everything off on the right foot and to provide the right type of bedrock foundation. So the method of doubt, he thinks, is the way that we will get to that certainty. And that's why he did it. Okay. So now, 45. Next, I just want you to speak to me about what are the things that he does doubt by the method of doubt. So, why, for example, does he say that you can't trust your perceptions, or that maybe everything you perceive, the things that you see, taste, touch, hear, smell, that those things could be false? Why? How could it be false that you're sitting at home watching this lecture as a student at Cal State Fullerton? How could that be false? He gives a reason. Maybe you could just recall. What's the basis or reason to think that your perceptions could be completely wrong? Because maybe what? What could be the reason to think that those could possibly be false? Okay, so Sarush, you mentioned this evil being. That's in the mix, but that I think has a little bit more to do with the second part of the question, which talked about the math and logic doubts. The initial part, good, Caitlin and Kai, it talked about the possibility of realistic dreams. Okay, so if you were in the middle of a dream, think back to your last dream that you really thought was happening, and then you woke up like, whoa, what a weird, crazy dream. I really thought that was real. Maybe this is the same thing. Like maybe right now, even though you think you're awake and just taking notes and getting ready for a final, maybe your entire existence, being a student at Cal State Fullerton, even being in this class, maybe it's all a big dream, I mean, it's starting to seem kind of almost unreal with the whole corona and everything. But, that aside, one could say, I don't 100% know if I'm dreaming or not. Maybe this seems real, but it's not. So dreams are a possible reason to doubt that anything you perceive with your five senses is true. If you're living in a dream or some simulation or matrix type situation, then whatever you're seeing, taste, touch, hear, and smell is not even real, and it's just an illusion. Then, okay, the other thing that you did mention, Sarush, is what about math, though? Like 2 + 2 is 4. Shouldn't that be true no matter whether it's a dream or not? And he says, in that case, maybe there could be some kind of external deceiver, like evil demon type situation. And if there was, then maybe that being is the one who's confusing you and manipulating your mind about the things that you think are actually true, like even math and logic. Okay, so dreams for perception, evil demon possibility for math and logic. Overall, at the end of all that, he says there's so much that is subject to doubt what remains? And that's when he mentions the whole "I think, therefore I am, you know you exist" thing. Okay, good. So we're going further. Descartes' example of the wax. Okay, so in Meditation 2, he gave this interesting example of a piece of wax. Why did he give that example? Well, okay, if you remember, let's talk about the example itself. He said, suppose there's a piece of wax which has a variety of different qualities that you can perceive with your five senses. So to the eye, it visually looks blue. To the tongue, it tastes like honey. To the nose, to smell, it smells like flowers. For your ears, if you hit it, it's in a solid state, so it makes a knocking sound. And the feeling is that if you touched it, it's cold and hard. Now, imagine, though, that we heat this wax up with a flame at a really high temperature. So afterwards, it's lost all the qualities that it had at first. Through the exposure to heat, it's not blue anymore in its color. It's like brown or black. It doesn't have that same floral scent. It just smells like burnt wax. It doesn't have the same honey taste. It tastes charred. It's no longer hard and cold to the touch because it's in a pile of liquefied state. And it doesn't make the same knocking sound if you strike on it because it's no longer solid. But doesn't the wax remain? Yes. So what Descartes is pointing out there is that the perceptual qualities that you noticed at the first instance were not essential to the wax. But what is essential to the wax are the things that don't change from time 1 to time 2. And what these deeper essential features of the wax are that it's flexible, extended, and changeable. Extended just means that it's occupying space, that it takes up some volume of space, which it does, even after it's been heated. Changeable just means that it can be changed in terms of its attributes. And flexible means that it can be physically reconfigured into different surface forms. So those are the deep characteristics of wax that survive through all of the physical changes. And what he's saying then is that if you want to know about a physical object in greater depth, you'd focus not on its non-essential qualities, the things that it can lose, but the things that it cannot lose, the qualities that it must have in order to even exist. So he thinks the mind has a deeper appreciation of physical objects than the senses do, because the senses only see a temporary snapshot of the object at a moment in time. But when you understand it in the deeper essential way, you're thinking about it through the intellect rather than through the five senses. Okay, so that's our wax example. Now, we're going on, and next author, next topic. So that finishes all the notes involved for theory of knowledge and epistemology. The next batch of notes has to do with the topic that follows that, which is time and the metaphysics of time. So we got to go over some of that. First of all, Einstein and the example of the moving train. Now, in Einstein's example, he asks us to suppose that there were two strikes of lightning that happened at 2 points along a railway. And then he asks a deceptively simple question. Suppose they're simultaneous. Question, what's that mean? What does it mean that the two lightning strikes happen simultaneously? And he says, well, in order to answer that question, we have to be able to make a test or an experiment which could be conducted to verify or to disconfirm that the two events were simultaneous. So how does he say to test for the simultaneity of the lightning strikes? Okay. He says, imagine then that, like this, for example, is the railway, and the lightning happened at these 2 points, A and B. We would measure the distance between A and B, and then we would assign a midpoint here. We would place one observer standing still, standing motionless at the midpoint M, so that they're an equal distance from A and from B. Okay, now if this individual standing at M sees the two lightning strikes happening at the same time, and if the speed of light is always fixed and constant, then that would indicate that they happen simultaneously relative to him. Because given the same speed that light would travel from A to M and from B to M, and given that they are traveling the same distance to reach M and arriving at the final destination at the same moment, it would thus be implied that they departed from A and B at the same time and are thus simultaneous. But Einstein quickly points out, though, that if there's a secondary observer on the scene who's in a different state of motion regarding A and B, then the second observer will not see the two events happening as though they are simultaneous. So he says next, suppose there is a train which is going with constant velocity v in the direction of travel from A towards B. When the observer who's on the train passes the midpoint, let's call his observation point M prime. So he'll coincide with M for the split second that he arrives to the midpoint. And as he hits the midpoint in his state of motion, the first observer who's motionless at M conducts his own observation, seeing the two events as simultaneous, as we just mentioned. But consider the second observer's state of motion. Since he's now being carried towards B as he passes the midpoint, he's not going to see B and A happening at the same time. He will see B happen first, and then after that, A. And the reason for this is because the light signals, which have to reach his eyes for him to perceive the events, have different lengths to travel. He's shortening the distance between himself and B once he passes this midpoint. And he is increasing the distance between himself and A as he does the same. So A has a longer path to travel at the same speed than B does to reach the observer. And therefore, the light from B is going to catch his eye first, and only after that will A. So now we get the conclusion of Einstein's example here, which is that the same two lightning strikes, A and B, could be considered simultaneous relative to this observer's position and state of motionlessness, but they could also be considered non-simultaneous regarding the second observer's state of velocity and path of motion. So are they simultaneous or not? It's just relative, and there's no objective fact about it. It's not that the first observer is the one who's correct and the second one is off, or vice versa. Both have equal claim to have gotten the so-called correct observation of the order of the events. And the deeper and very strange consequence that this poses is that any two events which exist in space-time could have the order at which they happen reordered based on a possible observer's position and state of motion. So what you think of as future moments could be seen as past moments relative to another possible observer, and therefore the existence of all moments must be conceded as equally real. Okay, so Einstein's moving train example. We're going on then to the next one. Now the question is about Ted Sider's article. Ted Sider said that the concept of time moving is like a paradox. Why does that sound like a paradox according to him? Arthur, let me get your question first before we get into this. Arthur, you're asking, it's the same lightning strike, but because the person in the train is moving to B, he sees it first. It's because in order to have vision, light has to strike your eye. If you close your eyes right now, I invite you to do that, notice that you can't see anything. Why is that? It's because when your eyelids close, light that would have otherwise been able to reach your retina is now blocked by the skin of your eyelids. So for you to see objects, light has to reflect off of the object, and then the light has to travel from that reflection towards your eye at the speed of light. Now, this man is trying to see A and B, but because he is closer to B and rushing towards it with his velocity, the light that is emitted from B does not have as far to go as A does, because he's running away from A and he's running towards B. So there's an asymmetrical length of distance that the two light emissions must travel to get to him. And since they both are traveling at the same fixed speed of light, the one with the greater distance is going to take longer to reach him. He's a moving target. He's running away from this light signal, closer to that one. And so it's that reason, basically, Arthur, just to kind of be very clear. Okay, so next, though, how time moving is a paradox. Tell me, why does Ted Sider claim that the concept of time moving is a paradox? Yeah, good, thank you. Why is it a paradox to say that time moves, according at least to Ted Sider? What's so paradoxical about that? Time is passing, time is marching on, time is flying. What is logically incoherent or confusing about the concept of time moving? Why did he say it's something that makes no sense? Okay, good, Kai, exactly. Because moving itself is based on time. So for my hand to move from where it's at now to like another point in space, like let me just grab that can of liqueur. Okay, so here my hand's going to move towards it. It happened. Now, how was my hand able to move over there? Well, because as it made the movement, it was at different places at different times. Now, if my hand stayed at this place all the whole time, then it would never have been able to grab the cup or the can. So for objects to move through space, they have to be at different places at different times. And he shows this in one graph that he depicts of a train's movement from, I believe, Boston to ultimately Washington, D.C. If the train stayed in Boston all day at all the different times of the day, then it never moved or never left the station. So when it makes its journey from A to B, it has to make that journey by traveling and being at different places at different times along the route. So now if we say time moves, what are we saying? That it's at different places at different times? What? Now we're using the concept of time to define the movement of time itself, which is like leading to an infinite regress, and it's circular. So that won't make sense. He says another way of trying to express time moving is by saying, well, maybe the present moment is moving, and this is what is meant. But that he doesn't think is any better of an explanation, because for the present moment to move, it would also have to be at different places at different times. But now we're using time again in order to give sense to the concept of its own movement, which leads us in a paradoxical circle. So those are the problems he mentioned. Time itself, if it moves, it would have to move in a way that only makes sense according to the analysis of motion that we currently have, which is by being in different places at different times. But that means that we rely on the notion of time to ground itself, and that's going in a circle. Okay, and that's also why ultimately Ted Sider says we should just give up on the whole concept of explaining time moving and just fully embrace the space-time theory of Einstein, which has a consequence that time does not move, and it just contains all the events of space and time, and it's jointly integrated with space. Okay, so next up, two similarities between space and time according to Ted Sider. Ted Sider says that in order for you to really dive into that space-time theory and embrace it, you have to kind of think about how space and time are a little more similar than you may have thought ordinarily. So time is a lot more like space than we may have thought according to space-time theory, and he mentions three such similarities. The question here, it just asks for two of the three, but I would like us to kind of go over all three so that you have the full range of possible options in case you forgot one, for example. So can anyone just quickly say to me, what's one of the so-called similarities between time and space? In terms of, okay, let me know. One similarity is in terms of what? Time and space are somewhat similar. One of the similarities, the first one he mentioned, is that they're similar in terms of reality. Good, Eduardo. But what does he mean by that? What's the meaning of his statement that time and space are similar in terms of reality? Can you explain that? Okay, so Kenzie, you're saying in terms of reality, objects that are far away in space are just as real as objects that are objects in present. Well, that part of your sentence is a little jumbled, but what you mean is objects that are far away in space are just as real as objects that are present in space. And the same is true with time. Okay, so as an example, take the computer or device that you're watching this on now. It's pretty close to you if you can see it. But suppose that you depart from where you're at right now and you leave this computer behind and you go on a very far journey. Maybe you go 5 miles, 10 miles, 100 miles. Maybe you take the space shuttle and you go to the moon. As you're getting farther and farther away, is the computer getting less and less real? No. It's just as real when it's right next to you now as it would be if it was separated from you by any amount of space. So distance in space does not change something being real. It's not like the things that are around you are the only real things, and things that are far away from you are less real. So however far away an object is doesn't change how real it is. And the same is true of time, meaning that events that are far away from the present moment are just as real as objects that are far away from the present position. So you having kids, graduating college, watching your kids graduate college, those moments that you would say they have not happened yet and therefore they maybe won't happen, if they ever happen in your life at all, then they're real. And they're real, just as real, whether they're happening today, tomorrow, or in 10 years. So it's not like only the present moment is real, basically. Just like it's not that only the present environment is real. All the moments are real, including everything in the past and everything in the future. So it's not just now, and it's not just here that it's real. That's the first similarity in terms of reality. The second one here, in terms of parts. Okay, so objects occupy space by having spatial parts, and they occupy time by having temporal parts. Let me go into that for just a moment. What is a temporal part? Can anyone say? What is that? Temporal part of an object is what? A temporal part of an object could be called a what? It's one instance of one's life. So Abraham, you say of one's life, and I understand why he's saying that. But keep in mind that objects which have no life, that are just like inanimate objects, also have temporal parts. Like, so this marker has temporal parts, but it's not living a life. So the most generic way to say it is an object at a single moment of time, correct? So do you or I have temporal parts according to this theory? Yes. It's just each instant of time that you exist, there's one of your temporal parts there. So in the space-time theory, you're built out of both kinds of parts. You have your spatial parts, which are just your body parts, hands, feet, head, torso, legs, and all of that. That's why you take up mass and why you take up space. But you also have temporal parts, which is why you occupy time. And the temporal parts are claimed to be just as real as the spatial parts are. So for example, right now, you sitting in the chair that you're sitting in, that is only one temporal part of you at each moment. And you're not fully present as the entire being you are at any single moment, because the aggregation of all your temporal parts extended through time and space, that is the object that you are. So you only experience one moment at a time, but if you could somehow see outside of time and space, you'd see the net aggregate of all. Okay, the third similarity is not in terms of reality, not in terms of parts, but in terms of the words here and now, correct? Yeah, so how are they similar, and what do they show about the similarity of space and time? Well, they're both relative terms, meaning that where or when is referred to by those words is not objective. It just depends on the position or time of the speaker. So if I'm saying my cat is here, that's true, but it's because of what is referred to by my statement here is my immediate surroundings. Now, if you don't have a cat and you say there's no cat here, it could look like on paper we're contradicting each other. I'm saying there's a cat here, you're saying there's no cat here. But we're obviously in two different complete locations. So your statement can be true because when you say here, it doesn't refer to my location, it refers to the location of you, the speaker. So there's no one single objective position called here. It's relative to wherever a speaker speaks. And there's no single moment, which is the objective moment called now. Now exists at whatever time the speaker speaks it. So a human being 100 years ago in 1920 saying, now women can vote, was referring to 1920 when the Constitution was amended 100 years ago for that purpose. And when I say now we're taking this review session, I'm not referring to 1920 or 2120, but 2020, because I'm speaking at this point in time. And our future descendants, you know, future grandchildren and people living in 100 years, when they say, now I'm looking at the social media account of my grandfather, they're not referring to, you know, an earlier time period, but the time period at which they're conducting the search and making that statement. Okay, so 3 similarities between space and time mentioned by Sider. The question asks for 2 of the 3, whichever 2 you thought you could talk about, if the question was chosen. Okay. So next up, why is it that according to the space-time theory, nothing really changes? Why is that? So according to the space-time theory of Einstein, which Ted Sider is, appropriating and agreeing with, why is it claimed that nothing actually quite changes? So why not? Me, for example, I have like more facial hair maybe than I had at the beginning of the semester. So you could say, oh, that his appearance has changed. In space-time theory, that's not quite correct. It gets described somewhat differently. So what is the so-called idea of change to a space-time theorist? What's really the real story behind what we call change? Because they would say there's not actually, like in a sense, there's technically no change. But why does it seem like things change? What's the reason on that? Maybe the facial hair thing wasn't good enough. Okay, so suppose that I lost my finger today, which definitely I hope does not happen. But then you could say, like, after that, I've lost a finger, so I've changed. I have one less, I don't know, digit. What's the way that the space-time theorist would assess that scenario? Okay, so all the events already exist. So me, after the loss of the finger, that part of my timeline, if you could imagine it as a big stretched out timeline of every moment in my life, that was already part of my timeline waiting for that event to materialize. So there wasn't really change, but instead what we would claim is that there's just two different temporal parts of me which have different features. Prior to the injury, the earlier temporal parts in the sequence had that finger. After the injury, the temporal parts after it don't have that finger, but all points lying on the entire time continuum have been real the whole time. So we could call it just qualitative difference of different temporal parts. That's not really change, but it is variety of attributes among the different parts that compose the object in space-time. Nothing changes according to this view because all the events are all real and they're already there. They're already fully existing in the space-time system that we are contained in. But if you want to recapture the concept of change, you would simply re-describe it as different attributes of different temporal parts of the same object. Okay, good. So then, David Lewis, in his paper on time travel, he talked about this weird sounding expression, soon he will be in the past. And he said that might seem to be a contradiction to a lot of individuals because it makes almost no sense to say that soon, meaning like subsequent to this moment, I will be in the past, which by definition is what has come before. So how can I be in the past in the future? Lewis says that we can interpret statements like this and make sense of them by introducing two different concepts of time, okay, or two different measurements or time frames. Who could tell me what those were from David Lewis's essay? He says we should have the ability to distinguish between this kind of time and that kind of time. What were the two types of time that David Lewis spoke of here to sort of push back against this claim of a paradox? So what are the two types of time, measurement or time frames? One was external and one was personal. Yes, that's correct. Okay, so let's speak about those two concepts and what they mean. External time, well, I'll start with personal actually. So personal time would be time as experienced by the individual time traveler as measured and shown on their personal wristwatch, which they keep on their arm. External time would be the time as measured and experienced by all other observers and all external clocks. So external and personal time can diverge. Therefore, when a person says, soon I will be in the past, they basically mean that soon in terms of personal time, I will be in the past relative to external time. So if I had an ability to go back to, I don't know, 1965 and watch the Beatles perform, I don't know, live in concert, then I might say something like, in about 30 minutes, I'm going to be in 1965. And it sounds like I'm saying that in 30 minutes, I'm going to be minus 50 years in the past, or 55 years in the past. But now this can make sense if we just apply the concept of external and personal time. It gets interpreted as, in 30 minutes of my personal time, I will be 50 years backwards in external time. And actually, there is no scientific reason to deny that that is possible, because it's an aspect of the space-time theory that individuals do in fact occupy their own time frame. It's just that they more or less coincide because we are not capable of moving at such diverse speeds that time dilation effects become anything more than infinitesimal and unmeasurable. Okay? So external and personal time allows us to make coherent sense of statements like the one mentioned there in that question. So from there, a possible closed loop of causation involving time travel. So another one of the claimed, at least on the surface, paradoxes of time travel that David Lewis mentions is, well, what about situations where an event happens, but it's completely caught in a loop, and therefore it becomes impossible to explain why it happened? Can you think of a situation like that that was mentioned in the lecture and that's mentioned in his essay? Or if you'd like, you can come up with another one if you're creative enough. But what could be like a closed loop of causation? What could be such a case? I can think of others from films too, but let's see if you have one on your mind, and then we'll maybe add another if possible. And this is going to be one of the last ones for today's meeting anyway, and we've got plenty of time to finish what remains. So we're making decent progress here. But yeah, just let me know, what is, for example, a scenario that would explain or give case of a closed causal loop in a time travel situation? Suppose that what happened? And just talk to me about this loop situation. Loop, causal loop? Okay, so you're saying, Abraham, is it talking to yourself? It could have something to do with that kind of situation, but you have to elaborate a little further. The case that he mentioned in the essay was like this. Suppose that you receive a phone call from a mysterious caller, and the caller, well, no, killing grandpa is not going to be the loop, but we'll get to the grandfather scenario next, Melissa, for sure. Let me go over this one situation mentioned by Lewis that's supposed to be a case of a loop. You get a call, let's say, tomorrow, and the person on the other end of the line says, hey, I have something I need you to build for me, and just do it. And so you're like, okay, I don't know who you are, but I'll do it. And you follow their directions, and it leads to the building of a certain machine. Now, you leave the machine alone for years, but years pass. Let's say 5 years from now, you turn it on, and you recognize that it's actually a time machine that the person informed you how to build. So now you have a time machine, and it's 5 years from now. You decided at that time, once you turned it on, to do what? To go back to, let's say, 2020, and to do what? Can you tell me the next little element in this story? Phone call was received, instructions were received. Machine was built. Machine was turned on only 5 years later, and then you make the decision at that time to do what with it? What are you going to do with it? I think even if you didn't read it, you'd find the answer intuitive, right? So you think, I'm going to take myself back to the earlier past so that I can make this phone call to my earlier self and tell them how to build the machine. So you do it. You take the machine, you go back to 2020, and you make this phone call to your 2020 self saying, hey, there's a time machine, and I need you to build it, and here's how you do it. Now you've passed the information along to your younger self. You go back to 2025, and you just continue your life. But think about the loop here. The younger self gets the information from the older self who makes the call. When that person becomes the older self, they remember receiving the information from their formerly older self, so they can then pass it along to the younger self. But if you just ask yourself, where did this information come from in the first place, that seems to be just caught in the loop with no external explanation or basis. David Lewis says these loops are weird, but they are not really logically impossible, and he thinks they're no weirder than the idea that God exists with no basic explanation, or that the universe exists and has no beginning. So he says there are some strange things about reality that we just kind of have to accept, and the possibility of these loops is just another one of them. It's weird, sure, but it's not necessarily logically impossible. When I think of the loop scenario, first of all, the movie Time Crimes is great, and anybody ever watches that, there's definitely a loop. That's the whole plot line. Another case I'm thinking of is the old Terminator movie. Now, I'm not sure if I'm going to get all the details properly correct, because it's been a while since I watched it. But if I remember correctly, there's a company called Skynet that in the future develops robots that end up taking over the world and trying to destroy humanity. And at that future time, there are members of a resistance movement that try to fight back against these aliens. And one of them is named John Connor, right? So they send back Arnold Schwarzenegger as the Terminator to 1985, I think, or 84, I can't remember. But anyway, he's going back to the early 80s because that's before John Connor is born, and he's supposed to assassinate the mother of John Connor, that's Linda Connor. Now, the human resistance is also trying to preserve the life of John Connor in the past, and they don't want the Terminator's mission to succeed. So they send back this guy who's supposed to like prevent John Connor from being killed by means of his mother being killed. Now, what happens when he goes back in time is he actually has sex with the mother of John Connor, and then he fathers the child. So it's like he's going back in time to prevent the assassination of the person who he actually ends up siring and causing to be born. And now if you just ask yourself, what's the reason for the motivation to go back in time by this member of the human resistance? It seems like it's kind of caught up in the loop. He has to go back in order to save John Connor, but by going back, he ends up creating John Connor. It's just another example of a possible loop. So they're found in science fictional scenarios of time travel. Now we're running close to the end of today's meeting time, but I'll just quickly say something about 53, and then we'll be good and we can move on. 53 says, if a person talks to their past self on the phone, how many people are having that conversation? Do you remember David Lewis said that it's best to say it's one person, but the two things that are having the conversation, they're not two people, they're just two temporal parts of the same person. And the reason that we should call them two temporal parts of the same person is because they're connected by psychological continuity and memory. Also, there's physical continuity. I talked to you earlier about, suppose I lost a finger. If, let's say, the young individual lost a finger as a child, then the future time traveler that goes back to talk to them is still not going to have that same finger because they're a part of the overall temporal sequence that has a member that lost it earlier. Also, you can remember being that person earlier receiving the call. So when you have two bona fide distinct individuals, they're not linked by psychological or physical continuity. But because these two stages of the same individual are, that's why it would be best to say that it's actually two temporal parts of one person. Explain the idea that people have temporal parts. That's question 54, but I think that we've kind of covered that earlier in the meeting today. It just means that at each moment of an individual's existence, there's one particular temporal part there. And so we are built out of both spatial and temporal parts, which could be exhibited on a space-time diagram that continues along the temporal axis to indicate the duration of time at which it exists. And if you, for example, cut a thin slice on the vertical axis through that space-time diagram, then you'd have one temporal part at that moment. Okay. So after that, it's grandfather paradox, and then it's all the philosophy of mind stuff. So that's what we're going to have for our next meeting next time. It'll definitely, I think, all get covered by the end of our Wednesday class meeting. So we're doing good, and I think we've made good progress today. So I'll let you guys go for now. Just don't forget that the essays you need to write, they're due on Wednesday before class time. Just send them to me as an email attachment, and then I'll be sure to grade them this weekend, and you'll be all set for the final. So for now, anyways, have a good one. Hope your week is off to a good start and everything's going well. And I'll see you back on Wednesday for our final review session meeting. Okay, guys? thank you so much, and take care. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.